Cold War strategy games are no rarity in the RTS market. Some of the first RTS games were developed during the conflict, and its influence is seen in many games. A lot of these early games become classics such as Command & Conquer, Warcraft, and recently, RTS games haven't been seeing much success. A lot of new games are released in subpar states, but to be fair, this seems to be an overall issue with gaming as a whole. There's also the issue that RTS games are a lot more niche than other genres, with most having relatively steep learning curves and incredibly high skill ceilings. As someone who has tried to introduce a few of my friends to the genre, I can say that it only appeals to those who seek it out. Hell, I tried to play Age of Empires 4 with a certain someone and got absolutely stomped because I didn't know what to do. Since AAA studios don't really want to cater to such a niche audience, there haven't been many high-quality RTS games recently. But in this dark age, a hero emerges. In my opinion, the champion of historical RTS games. Eugen Systems and their absolute gem of a game, Warno. Warno is an RTS that takes place in 1989 Germany. The classic Cold War gone hot scenario, full the gap in everything. The entire game is set in West Germany, although I do hope we get to see other theaters in the future. The maps reflect this setting. You fight through open fields, forested hills, and urban cities, but it does feel like it takes place in Central Europe. You can zoom in really close and see lots of little details for a game of this scale. Parked cars, football fields, it feels lived in, or at least somewhere where people used to live. There's one map where part of it is a burnt-out wasteland. There's another where the entire battle revolves around a massive airfield in the center of the map, and the runway acts like a no man's land between the sides. The map Volcano does not have a volcano, 0 out of 10 worst map in the game. The game looks amazing for a real-time strategy game, and it barely affects performance for me unless I zoom in and out really fast. This also extends to the units. Every vehicle looks beautiful, they're all modeled as accurately as possible. As a connoisseur of military equipment, seeing all this just puts a smile on my face. Just don't look at the infantry, or turn down the model quality.
Huh?
Also, the explosions look pretty cool. Each side is based on units that were either on the border or were likely to be deployed to the border. You're not gonna see Chinese or Australian troops anytime soon, even if it would be fucking awesome. The game goes to that extra step of being historically authentic. I use that word because, oh god, is it not historically accurate, but that isn't a bad thing. There are a lot of creative liberties taken with Warno, but none of them are too far out there. If I saw this in Warno, then I would be up in arms, but so far, there isn't anything like that. I don't mind nations getting stuff from outside the time frame for balance as long as it isn't too far. I hear a lot of people complaining about the KA-50, but it's only in a single division and they don't even get that many of them. Speaking of which, Warno doesn't have factions like other RTS games. Whereas other games would have factions that represent entire nations, Warno has the 3rd Armored Division, 79th Guards Tank Division, and the 7th Panzer Division Communist Edition. Each division is its own thing and is balanced as such. This ensures one player doesn't get all the best units at once. Having ACAF Abrams supported by Rangers and Strike Eagles would be cancer, but thankfully each of these powerful units is given separately. Forcing players to either work together or to play around a division's strengths makes the gameplay really enjoyable. Each division is split into 8 categories and is balanced around these categories. One division might excel in tanks but lack infantry. Another might have elite airborne infantry and air support but doesn't have the tanks required to push along a wide front. One division might have the F-117 Nighthawk. When making a deck, you have 50 points to split between the categories. Units come in cards. These cards have a certain number of units depending on the unit and its veterancy. Typically, the weaker and cheaper the unit, the more of it you get. Picking a card puts it into a slot that'll use up your points. The more cards you have in one category, the more points each card will cost, although it's different for each division. This means that you can't bring everything in one division, you gotta think about what units you want. This is especially important in the logistics tab where cards tend to be pretty scarce. I mean, I'm not spending 2 points on a supply chopper. Okay, let's talk about the actual gameplay. Warno is what's known as a real-time tactics game. This means no workers, no economy, no buildings, except the FOB, all combat. Everyone gets the same income, 2 sides beat the shit out of each other for 30 minutes, may the best commander win. Unless it's the 101st versus the 56th, then the 101st just dies. Upon starting a battle, you get the deployment phase. Here, you could use your starting points to deploy your initial units and give them orders. Recon and airborne units can be placed outside the starting area to scout ahead or take important positions quickly. Infantry move slowly, but they come in transports. These can be anything from regular trucks to IFVs that could go toe-to-toe with most tanks. All vehicles move faster on roads, meaning that the flow of battle will usually follow roads. Cutting them off means you'll be cutting off logistics and reinforcements. Warno is a game that heavily encourages the use of combined arms. A death stack of tanks may seem scary, but it can easily be wiped out by an airstrike. Even without an airstrike, tanks can still find themselves vulnerable to things like infantry or anti-tank weapons, but in a head-on firefight, a tank would usually win. Units in Warno not only take damage to their health, but they also take damage to their mental state. The longer a unit is in combat, the more stressed they become. This degrades their stats and can cause a unit to become stunned for a short time or even a retreat. This can be mediated by having higher veterancy or by having certain traits. Having nearby military police will bring discipline to the troops. Some units are resolute and will never retreat. Every East German unit is resolute because if they conquer West Germany, they get to stay there. Back to the tank versus infantry fight, unless those first few shots kill the tank will suppress and then stun the unit until it dies. That is, if the tank spots the defender first. Most real-time strategy games have some kind of vision mechanic. It's usually just a radius around your units that reveals everything. Some units might have longer sight ranges or might have some kind of stealth mechanic where if they stand still or use an ability, they become completely invisible. Here, every unit has both optics and a stealth stat. These determine what ranges a unit will be spotted at. A unit with high stealth will either require you to get really close to spot it or for a unit with high optics to have line of sight. Other factors can also affect both stats. Being in cover increases stealth, while some traits like recon will increase optics. Units like infantry will have average optics and good stealth, while vehicles like tanks will have bad optics and bad stealth, with some exceptions. This means that a unit in cover might get the drop on an enemy or even be able to fire at them without being spotted. This makes recon or infantry support a must-have for offensives. Or you could just use fire position, but that requires you to pay attention and spend time that might be better spent on other things. While a lot of other games might have a similar fire position order, I feel like it fits in Warno a lot better due to how the game's various weapons work. Artillery and bombers can target individual units, but they're best used for indirect fire at targets you can't see. Bombarding suspected enemy positions before an assault is usually a good idea, but remember to move your artillery after firing to avoid counter-battery fire. Bombardments also degrade cover or can just straight up destroy buildings to remove a vital defensive position. Achieving victory usually involves capturing strategic zones with command units. These could either give you points towards victory or could give you more income depending on which game mode you're playing. If your enemy has a command unit in the same zone as you, the zone will be divided and neither side will get points from it. Command units also give a veterancy buff to nearby units. Keeping track of a lot of units can get a little overwhelming, but it's helped a lot by Warno's unit voice lines. Units have different lines depending on both what type of unit it is and the situation. On top of this, units from different languages will speak their own native languages. This might sound like an issue, but after some time you begin to recognize the strange utterings of the French. Also, the sound effects are nice. Also, this game has some of the best music I've ever heard in an RTS game.
In order, sir. If the enemy is in range, so are we. Calm down speed, driver. I've got him!
This is the story.
Le droit devant, prêt à attaquer. Popov, droit devant. Mettez-vous en formation. Roulez, туда! Обнаружен противник. Приготовиться к бою.
Готов к выполнению боевой задачи. Понял, командир.
Выдвигается к цели. 8 бомбы и ракеты. Боеприпасы закончились. Ха-ха-ха! Хорошо накрыл, стрелок. Don't do anything that moves. Angreifer! Ziel zerstört! Höre Sie klar und deutlich! Waffen feuerbereit! Hydraulik ist ein! Klar zum Gefecht! Bewegliche Befehlsstelle bereit! Ihr Bohre ein! Weiter kann! Führungsfahrzeug bereit! Gerade Hugo! Ummunitionieren den Bereitschaftsbunker! Führen Sie uns, folgen Sie uns!
I'm upset they didn't bring back the "I feel like turkey on Thanksgiving" line from Steel Division 2. The game has fully embraced the 80s synth aesthetic, and I really adore it for that. It's just so cool. Before we get to the conclusion, there's something else I need to talk about. Wargame Red Dragon. If it looks familiar, yeah, this is the game that came before Warno. Unlike Warno, which only covers a specific time period in a specific location, Wargame encompasses the entire globe with a multitude of time periods throughout the Cold War. The deck building system is completely different. Instead of divisions, you have more traditional factions and specializations. You could go with the Generals deck that represents the vast glory of the Soviet Union, or you could fully specialize in LARP's Division de Guerre. There's a lot more content here than in Warno. That being said, I'm sure it's a great game and I can see why people prefer it over Warno, but I just can't bring myself to enjoy it. I find the deck system and all the units really cool, but the lack of certain aspects from the later games makes it kind of a chore for me to play. Things like being able to give your units orders at the beginning of a match and smart orders allow for players to focus on things like combat and planning, which is what a lot of people come to these games for. Sorry, Wargame. Maybe in another timeline I have 200 hours in you, but this is the Warno timeline. I originally came to Wargame Red Dragon to play as the Marines, but Reforger got updated with the Marine Division so I can get my Ural LARP in Warno. Speaking of which, the game also has an active modding community. Although they are limited in what they can change, the game's mods can still add a lot of cool stuff. Shout out to Reforger 1993 made by irs.gov. I use it for some of the footage in the video. It adds some pretty cool stuff like the AC-130, the S-300, and Error 404 Division Not Found. Despite its rough early access, Warno truly has become a great game. I remember playing it early on in early access and hating it, but over time it really has improved. If Fusion keeps updating it, then I think Warno could become one of the all-time greats. I'm excited to see where they take the game. I hope they expand past Central Europe and add other fronts like East Asia and the Middle East. I already have like 200 hours of playtime at the time of writing this, but I expect that number to keep going up. I also hope they fix some of the game's more prevalent issues soon. Being able to figure out where your enemy's units are by listening to them, like, that's messed up, dude. Like, get rid of that. No, that's not how it should work. I also didn't talk about Operations or Army General because I haven't played them yet. Overall, the gameplay is fun and rewarding, the game looks great, and the sound and music are just the icing on top. Warno has everything I could ever want from a Cold War RTS game. Well, except for one thing. I hope you all have a nice day. The keybind to group and ungroup units is Alt-G.